Journey back to a time of love and confusion, Stephen, in a world where man and Gunga forge laser swords and discuss trade policies. Welcome to the Fortress of Dorkness, the nerdy nexus for all your geeky needs. I'm your host, Chris Rod Villerling. Prepare to enter another dimension of sight, sound, and mind. A journey into a wondrous land of imagination. Real history is entering Twilight Zone, the movie. But before we get into it, that's an exact Christian Villarreal quote, we have a warning for viewers. Many of you may already be familiar with the troubled history of this film. For those of you who are experiencing it for the first time, this episode will contain disturbing and graphic content of an event that ended with the deaths of 3 people. 1983's Twilight Zone, the movie, was produced by Steven Spielberg and John Landis and was conceived as a feature film adaptation of the show. The idea was to have 4 segments, 3 remakes of classic Twilight Zone episodes, and 1 original segment based loosely on an existing episode. Spielberg, Joe Dante, and George Miller directed the remakes, while Landis took on the responsibility of directing the prologue and the original segment which would open the film. In 1982, Landis began shooting his segment titled Time Out, loosely based on the episode A Quality of Mercy, with actor Vic Morrow as the lead. That particular episode was about a bigoted man who suffers through the oppression of the people and races he hated. The new segment was to end with the man Bill Connor redeeming himself by saving a group of Vietnamese children during the Vietnam War. The production had a severe disregard for safety from the start. Landis and producer George Fossley Jr. hid the fact that the 2 children needed for the scene did not have permission to be there under California child labor laws. The law did not allow children to work at night, and Landis opted not to get a special permit as he knew they would reject it because of the number of explosive effects on set. The children's parents were paid under the table and were told to keep hush about the children's involvement in the scene, even from the fire team on set. Besides this, a fire safety officer on site neglected to tell the director his concerns that the large number of explosives being used for effects could cause a crash. On July 23rd, 1982, the crew arrived at the Indian Dunes in Santa Clarita, California, to shoot the sequence where Bill Connor would save the 2 children. Actor Morrow would have to carry the 2 children across a river while the aforementioned explosions were detonating around them. A helicopter was stationed 25 feet above the actors. This is where we'd like to pause and remind viewers that what is coming up is extremely disturbing. When a large mortar went off underneath the tail rotor, the rotor failed and detached from the copter, bringing the vehicle down. Morrow reached for one of the children who had fallen in the water, but it was too late. The helicopter fell to the ground, decapitating Morrow and one of the children and crushing the other. 6 members of the crew were also injured. John Landis, George Fossley Jr., the copter pilot Dorsey Wingo, production manager Dan Allingham, and explosive specialist Paul Stewart spent 9 months in court until they were acquitted of manslaughter. Deputy District Attorney Leah DiAgostino famously handed Landis a tissue after he broke down in court, only to call him a murderer as she did. Legal action lasted nearly a decade while all the families involved settled out of court. The parents of the children claimed that they were never made aware of the helicopter's explosives or risks involved and that there was no danger. Daniel Lee, father of Micah Ding Lee, testified Landis instructed Wingo to descend lower. Cameramen on board the helicopter corroborated this further by stating, Allingham told the pilot to leave the area, but Landis insisted he go lower. They also testified that Landis was warned about the dangers, but ignored warning and perhaps jokingly stated they may lose the helicopter if they did. The event sent shockwaves through the industry, where on-set safety was reassessed, creating new rules, hotlines, and procedures to prevent such accidents from happening again. Second Assistant Director Andy House had his name removed from the credits and replaced with a familiar pseudonym, Alan Smithy. Perhaps eeriest of all was a comment from Morrow while shooting 1974's Dirty Mary Crazy Larry. Morrow, who had helicopter scenes in the film, took out a $1 million policy on his life, stating, "I have always had a premonition I was going to die in a helicopter crash." The film was released in 1983 and included the segment, simply omitting the original ending. Footage from the incident is widely spread online. More anthology-style sequels with new directors were planned for the film, but canceled due to the incident and poor box office results. After this tragedy, Steven Spielberg cut all his ties with John Landis, saying the incident made him grow up a little. He went on to say, "No movie is worth dying for. I think people are standing up much more now than ever before to producers and directors who ask too much. If something isn't safe, it's the right and responsibility of every actor and crew member to yell, 'Cut!'" Spielberg's original plan was to adapt The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street for his segment, an alien story about induced paranoia, but the plot would have involved children and shooting at night, something that now left a bitter taste. Landis himself later said, "There was absolutely no good aspect about this whole story. The tragedy, which I think about every day, had an enormous impact on my career, from which it may possibly never recover. What happened during the Twilight Zone film is a tragedy, and yet set accidents still happen today because of neglectful and irresponsible decisions." To all you fellow filmmakers out there, we say film responsibly, and always remember that your safety is not worth the cost of a ticket. That's all we have for today. Leave your comments in another dimension. Please like, subscribe, and follow us into a dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. This has been Real History. I'm Christian Villarreal, and you've been watching The Fortress of Dorkness.